Now, this class is entirely on some of the major principles of the infinite way. And regardless of how much reading you may have done in infinite way books, regardless of how many hours you may have heard tapes, remember that your experience, your real spiritual experience, begins only when you are able to recognize specific principles and work with them. In other words, just a general knowledge of the infinite way is not a working knowledge of principles. To know in a general sort of way what the infinite way is really not helpful at all in bringing forth harmonious living. You realize that the only reason we ever turn to God, the only reason we ever turn to truth, is that we are seeking to bring divine harmony into our human experience. In other words, we are definitely not satisfied with being well part of the time and sick part of the time. We're certainly not satisfied to see members of our family going off into side paths of sin, false appetite, and so forth. We're certainly not satisfied that we have prosperity one time and lack another time, war sometimes and peace other times. And therefore, there is a drive within us, a drive that is compelling us to seek spiritual harmony, that is, the spiritual life of God or the spiritual law of God that will change our human experience from an up and down one to a smooth and even one. We are entitled to health, peace, harmony, abundance under the laws of God. The Master made that very clear, that we are to be children of God, and if children, then heirs, joint heirs to all the heavenly riches. And therefore our birthright is good. And in the proportion as we are not having good, we are not receiving our birthright. There is a barrier. And so we are driven sooner or later to seek a law of God or a way of God that will enable us to bring divine harmony into our experience. Now, to do this, there must be certain specific rules to live by and certain specific principles. Without this, you are not living the spiritual life, regardless of how religious you may believe yourself to be, because in his revelation, the Master outlined specific codes of conduct that we must obey if we are to enjoy the grace of God. What do we mean by the grace of God? We mean the ability to live, not by might or by power, the ability to live by grace, by the gift of God, by my Spirit. The ability to live as if it were really true what he taught, that your heavenly Father knoweth that you have need of these things, and it is his good pleasure to give you them. And therefore to live spiritually really means to live in a constant receiving of God's love, God's care, God's protection, God's abundance, not by might, not by power, not by striving, not by struggle, but by inheritance. You are an heir of God, and by inheritance, by His grace, by His gift, the good things of life should unfold to you. But the Master taught that they won't unless you obey certain laws, fulfill certain obligations, live according to certain codes and principles. Of course, as a part of the code of conduct, in the Sermon on the Mount, He told you what you must give up. Ye have heard it said of old, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. And He said you have to abandon all ideas of revenge, all ideas of getting even, all ideas of punishment, and learn to resist not evil, not fight back, not pay back, but resist not evil, not to seek vengeance, but to forgive 70 times 7, not to try to get even with our enemy, but pray for them that despitefully use you. Pray for them that persecute you. Pray for them that do evil to you. You see then that when we are not receiving God's grace, the chances are we are disobeying some of the things on this side, the side of I say unto you. We may still be clinging to some of this, ye have heard it said of old. We don't realize it, of course, until we pick up the Sermon on the Mount and say, well, wait a minute, what did the Master say to us about what we must give up? And then find how many of those things we're still guilty of, still accepting. And then read the other side where He says, but I say unto you, and count up how many of those you are obedient to. And then perhaps you realize to what extent you are breaking the spiritual code and still expecting answers to prayer, still expecting God's love, God's care, God's protection, which the Master revealed cannot be given you except that ye are in obedience to these things. Now, in the same way, when you come to healing works, there is no way of bringing healing by praying to God to heal somebody. That has been tried for thousands of years and has rarely been successful. Every parent in the history of the whole world has prayed for their children and their children's health and their children's safety and their children's integrity. And the history of the world shows how far wrong those prayers have gone, how little answer there has been to them. The whole world has always prayed for peace on earth, and peace on earth never came through anybody's prayers, not even when tens of millions of people united in praying for peace on earth, it didn't come. We have learned long time since that the way to bring spiritual harmony, God's harmony, into our life isn't to pray for it. It is to know the truth, and the truth will make you free. Now, where spiritual healing is successful, it is because there are people who have learned to know the truth and to know the truth in treatment or prayer work, consciously, specifically, and by means of this bring the divine harmony into expression. Now, every metaphysical system has its own mode and means of treatment and prayer, and each have their own principles. And so an individual may work with any of those to which they are led, and have whatever measure of success is in accordance with their own devotion to it. We, in the Infinite Way, have an entirely different set of principles. We never treat an individual, and we never give a treatment to any individual. We never take the name of a patient or person into our treatment. We never take the name of the disease or the condition into our treatment. We never give a treatment in the sense of saying, you are perfect, or you are spiritual, or he is perfect, or she is spiritual. We never use treatments of that nature. In other words, there is no suggestion and no power of suggestion in our work, because never, under any circumstances, do we think a thought in the direction of our patient or student. Never once do we enter the mental home, the mind of a patient. Never do we intrude into their mental or spiritual home or atmosphere. Never do we direct a thought at them. Of course, the basis of our work differs, because we do not believe in the power of thought. We do not believe that good thinking brings good and bad thinking brings bad. We believe that who by taking thought can accomplish anything. We believe that thought, and I shouldn't use the word believe because we've spent 30 years in demonstrating this and proving it, that thought is not power. And therefore, we never use a thought in the direction of our patient. We never use a thought in our treatment. How then is our healing work brought about? And you will find this difficult in the beginning, but as you train yourself, you will find how simple it is. And this is very simple. As far as I know, this is about the simplest system and mode of metaphysical or spiritual healing practice there is. And the reason is this. We have received a revelation which taught us that evil is never personal, it is impersonal, and it has its origin in a universal belief in two powers. In other words, the power of good and of evil. Now, there is no power of good and there is no power of evil. The only power there really is spiritual power. And that isn't good because good has an opposite, and spiritual power has no opposite. Spiritual power is an infinite state of being, and there can be no evil power, because that would give us the idea of a God and then something besides God, and that would make God less than infinite, and you'd have to throw out the whole teaching of an infinite God, an infinite power. If there is such a thing as a power, a godly power, It must be infinite. But if there is an infinite godly power, how can there be any other power? Because you can't have an infinity and something else. You can't have life and death occupying the same space at the same time. You can't have good and evil occupying the same space at the same time. And if spirit is infinite, then you have no other power. You have no other substance, no other law, no other activity. And so it is then that in our work, and more especially in our prayer and treatment work, our basis is that evil of any form, any nature, is impersonal, and being impersonal has no person in whom, on whom, or through whom to operate. Being impersonal, it is without person. Therefore, we don't have to think of our patient, we don't have to think of our student, because our patient or student hasn't any evil. Therefore, we have nothing to do with trying to remove evil from them or overcome evil when we have already discerned that evil is impersonal, without person. You may wonder how then the treatment affects them. And you must be clear on this if you want to get results. The way the treatment benefits a specific patient is that when the patient has reached out for the help, they have made contact with the practitioner's consciousness. And whatever truth is known in the practitioner's consciousness becomes the law unto the patient, without directing any thought at them, because the patient themselves has made the contact with the consciousness of truth. Jesus did not know that the woman who pressed through the throng and touched the hem of his robe was healed until after the healing had taken place. Why? He did not direct any thought at her. She tuned into his consciousness by forcing her way through the crowd, touching the hem of his robe. It was just as much, really. It was the same as if she'd stayed home and picked up the telephone and rang him, and when he answered, click, she was in his consciousness in that moment. Or had she just stayed home and written him a letter, in the writing of that letter, she entered his consciousness. And so it is with our patients and students. The very moment that it comes to their mind, I will telephone Joel, I will cable Joel, I will write Joel, I will go to Joel. In that second, they have made contact, and they can expect the healing any minute from then on, even long before I receive their call. Why? Humanly, I can't do anything to heal anyone. It is spiritually that it's done. It isn't the contact with my intellect or my mind that heals anyone. It is a contact with that developed spiritual consciousness that knows there is but one infinite power. And the very moment you touch that consciousness, the moment you reach out, that consciousness is at work for you. You might say, do you know it? Not always. Once in a while I do, but not always. And it isn't important whether I do or not, because it isn't my human self that is bringing to you the answer to your problem. I, as Jesus said, I of my own self can do nothing for you. It is the Father within me that doeth the works. And when you contact me, It is not me. It is the Father within me that responds to you. And the Father within me is the degree of spiritual consciousness. And by spiritual consciousness we mean the degree of the awareness of God as the only power, the only law, the only life, the only being. So, all healings take place at the point of contact with the individual, with the practitioner, so that if someone asks you for help, you immediately dismiss them. You do not think about them. You do not think about their name. You do not think about their condition, because nothing you can do about it humanly. But you turn to this truth. All evil, error of any name or nature, in the form of sin, in the form of disease, in the form of unemployment, in the form of lack, all of this is impersonal. Has nothing to do with the child of God. It is absolutely impersonal. It has no person in whom, on whom, or through whom to operate. And not only it is impersonal, it is impotent. It has no power, because we have understood God as infinite all power. Now, you can't have God as infinite all power and then turn to God and have God do something to something else when there is no something else. That is why our work is unique in this, that we never use the power of divine mind over mortal mind. We never use the power of truth over error. We never use the power of love over hate. We never use the power of God over sin, disease, or death. Why? Because you're setting up duality. You're setting up two-ness. You're setting up Adam and Eve outside the Garden of Eden. You're setting up in your own mind that there is good and evil. Now, there isn't. And the healing consciousness is one that does not use truth. As a matter of fact, the very term use truth is an insulting one. Imagine using God. Make him your little messenger boy to send him around and do your errands. You can't use truth, and you can't use God. And God isn't an errand boy that you can send out, say, I want you to heal my nephew over there, or the sweet little person who deserves it. God knows better than you do what we need. No. Instead of using God or using truth, instead of trying to get one great big power to do something to another power, you don't. You sit still quietly and you realize, thank God that only God is power. Thank God that there are no powers to use God against or over or with. Thank God for God's omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience. Thank God that God is the all-knowing mind that doesn't have to be told to go and heal someone. Thank God that God is the divine love that is already taking care of God's universe. Thank God that God being spirit, law being God, all law is spiritual law. So we don't have any material laws to overcome or mental laws. We don't have material powers. We don't have mental powers. Now this brings up an interesting question. What about this subject of malpractice? Well, let me tell you that every discord you have ever suffered in your life, of a minor or major nature, has been the result of malpractice. But please remember this: it wasn't the malpractice of any person or any group of persons or any race or religion of persons. Malpractice never operates in that way. The only malpractice there is the universal belief in two powers, and it acts as a malpractice. People aren't malpractitioners. They can think all the evil thoughts they want. It won't come nigh your dwelling place. It'll react upon them. Why? They are the believers in two powers, or they wouldn't be thinking evil thoughts. Therefore, to the believer in two powers, there comes the experience of two powers, sometimes good and sometimes evil. So that if there are people stupid enough to malpractice, feel sorry for them, because they are casting stale bread on the water, and that's what has to come back to them. It can't reach you, because nothing can reach you except what you put on the water. The bread that you cast on the water comes back to you. The good you do comes back to you. But you can't do evil if you are following a realization of one power. You can't do evil. There's no more capacity left in you to do evil. But if by chance there should be, don't worry, it will react on you. It will not react upon anyone else. Never believe for a moment that you are suffering from anyone else's evil thoughts, except in proportion as you are giving power to two powers, to evil. Ah, yes, then it isn't their thoughts you're suffering from. It's your acceptance of the belief in two powers. Is this clear to you? Is this registering? Are you following this?
Yes.
Be very certain of this. Nobody's good thoughts is blessing you, and nobody's bad thoughts can harm you. I once attended a meeting where a leader on the platform said, "Oh, our associate is 3,000 miles away today, and let us stop and send our thought out there to bless her." And I thought, my heavens, what is our associate doing out there? And up to now, we haven't sent out any thoughts. What is she doing without the... Oh, well, maybe she has God. Now, you see, it's kind of funny, isn't it? When you stop to think, God doesn't operate in time or space. You can't begin now to send good thoughts to somebody. If God hasn't been there before you, they've already been in trouble. And what's happening to this world while we sleep and aren't sending out any good thoughts? Well, probably we sent out enough during the day so they'll hold over for tonight. Isn't it kind of ridiculous when you stop to think of it, that God needs our thought in order to make the sun come up tomorrow morning, or to keep the moon floating around tonight, or the tides coming in and going out. And how many times do we forget to pray that there be salt in the ocean? But it keeps on being there. Somehow or other, even without our taking thought, it happens. And have you noticed that every year the roses only come from rose bushes, and the pawpaw from the pawpaw trees, and the pineapples from the pineapple bushes, and we forgot to pray about it. But there it is, the crops keep coming around. Like begets like. It's a law. And nobody stops to say a little prayer about it. No, do you not see that the only way that I can pray for you is to abide in the realization of Emmanuel? God is with you. That's the only prayer. There's no other prayer. I can't send God to you because God is infinite and he must already be there, or we wouldn't have such a word as omnipresence. And God must be the power operating in your life, or we wouldn't have such a word as omnipotence. And God must know your need, or we wouldn't have such a word as omniscience. All knowledge. And so you see, the excuse me, the only legitimate prayer is realizing God. I'm always thrilled when I remember the Hebrew leader Maimonides. He said, if you say God is almighty, God is love, God is great, God is ever present, you are saying no more than if you just say God is. Isn't it true? Isn't it true? How can you add to that God is? And if God is, where are my fears? How can there be fears if God is, and if we have this inner realization or conviction God is? There can't be fears anymore, because he that is within me is greater than any circumstance of the outer realm. And so you see then that in our treatment work, we have nothing to do with the patient. We have nothing whatsoever to do with them. As a matter of fact, I said to you last night, do not be surprised if the very moment you learn one single principle that you are called upon to help someone, to pray for someone. And one student in the class told me this evening that after last night's class, he, for the first time, was called upon to pray for somebody. Certainly the most natural thing in the world, because he knows how to pray. And there's only one way to pray. Is there any power but God? Is there any presence but God? Is there any life but God? Is there any law but God? Is there any reality to any evil? Is it a power, or is it only a power as long as we accept two powers? As soon as we know the principle of the infinite way, we begin to heal. And the principle of the infinite way is not one power over another. Not using the power of prayer to get rid of the power of evil, not using the power of God to get rid of the power of the devil, not using truth to get rid of error, but realizing God as one, God as only, God as infinite, God as all, God as omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience. And as you abide in that, whoever has turned to you for help will receive the benefit of it. Some of you right in this room now have called on me for help, written to me for help when I was thousands of miles away, and I couldn't possibly know what was wrong or why, and sometimes couldn't even know who it was that was writing me, because even if I've met you once, it doesn't connect you with your name. And so it is that I receive a letter, and it has a name on it, and I couldn't possibly identify it with the individual until after I've met you 2 or 3 times. Then you are solidly in my consciousness, and I know who you are. But it has nothing to do with healing work. The healing takes place whether I know who you are, or whether I've never met you. Why? Because I'm never interested in healing you. I am interested in knowing the truth, because if I know the truth will make you free. And the truth is, God is spirit, and God's kingdom is spiritual, and God's law is spiritual. God's man is spiritual. God's life is spiritual. It doesn't make any difference how many billion times it's multiplied on earth, it's still spiritual. And that's the truth that I have to know. There is nothing but a spiritual universe. When you read the New Testament, pay particular attention to every one of Jesus' healings, and notice that in not one of them did he pray to God to heal anybody. In not one of them did he ask God to heal anybody. And he's a pretty good way shower. We could afford to follow his example. All he did was ask you, what did hinder you? There's no other power. Get up and walk. Or open your eyes. Or Lazarus, come forth. Or maid, I say unto thee, arise. He didn't have to ask God, because he recognized, as he said to Pilate, thou couldst have no power over me. And he said it to sin, and he said it to disease, and he said it to death. You have no power. God is infinite. And in the infinity of God, there is no other power. And as you work with this principle, and that is our major principle in this work, that is what sets this work apart from all others. That is what makes this work unique. We are not seeking a power to destroy evil. We are not seeking God's favor. We have God's favor by being children of God. We don't have to earn it or deserve it. We were born into it. You call no man on earth your father. That is one of our great principles. Call no man on earth your father. There is but one Father, and he's the Spirit. And that's your heritage. A spiritual being, a spiritual life, a spiritual body, and anything else that presents itself to my eyes or ears is just a delusion caused by a universal belief in two powers, and I don't have to accept what I see. I do not have to accept what I hear, because we're always seeing erroneously. You know, if you go down to the railroad tracks and look in the distance, you'll see them come together, but they don't. You go out to the water's edge, you'll see the sky sitting on the water right out there, but it doesn't happen that way. You look up at the stars and they look this big, but it isn't true. And just remember, you haven't the faintest idea how many things you are not seeing correctly. For instance, you probably think that that's red or orange or one of those colors. That isn't at all. There isn't any color here. Not a bit. The only place there's any color is in your eye. Out here there are nothing but light waves, vibrations, and no color. And when these vibrations touch your eyeball, you translate those vibrations into color. Did you know that I am not making any sound with my voice? There is no sound coming out of my mouth. There are only vibrations of air. No sound. The sound only begins when the vibrations touch your eardrum. You interpret them into sound. It's like a telegraph set. Tick, 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 dock, dock, dock. Meaningless until it touches the telegrapher's ear, and then he makes sense out of it. And so it is that I send out wave vibrations, air vibrations, air waves. They touch your ear, you interpret them into sound. And so it is with color. And that is why when people are colorblind, they're seeing red as green or green as red. Why? Because the color isn't out here. It is only formed when it touches their eyeball. Therefore, we are told that we must not believe the evidence of our senses. Don't believe everything you hear, see, taste, touch, or smell, because a great deal of it isn't the way it appears to be. Now, there is a way in which you can know correctly, and that is through spiritual discernment. Through spiritual discernment, I know that the body is not you. The body is not me. I have had the experience. You will hear it on some of the class tapes. And you may have the experience any moment you like, this minute if you like. Just look down at your feet and ask yourself if you are down there. And you'll very quickly agree that you're not. That those feet are not you, they are yours. And now follow them up to the knees and see if you're there. And you'll find out you're not. They are yours, not you. And go on right up to your waist and up to your neck and on up to the top of your head. And you'll discover you aren't there at all. This whole body belongs to you, and you aren't in it. Someday you'll have the actual experience in meditation of discovering that nobody ever has been in a body. Surgery has never found anybody in a body. Surgery has never located anybody in a body. Nor is there any place in a body where you could dwell. And you'll soon find out then that this body is not you, it is yours. And it is yours to do with as you will. This is your body. So, if I look out at you and I make the mistake of thinking that what I see is you, I'm deluded right from the start, because I know where to look for you. You are looking through your eyes. You're not back in the back of your head. You're looking down through your eyes from outside. And I can look right up through your eyes and see you on top of your head, because you aren't in that body. And as a matter of fact, you aren't the person you think you are. You aren't limited. You aren't finite. You have no age. You were never born. You can never die. Anything can happen to your body. You can cut it up, chop it up, throw it off a cliff or over a bridge, do anything you like with it, but it'll never affect you. For you aren't there. You never were there, you never will be there. And the more you realize this, the more your body will respond to you harmoniously. The more you realize that your body doesn't govern you, there is a you that tells your feet in what direction you want them to walk. There is a you that tells your hands whether to give or receive. There is a you that decides when you will go to sleep at night or when you will get up in the morning. And you have got to learn this For this is another of our basic principles. There is a you. A you, an individual, inextinguishable you. Indestructible you. The offspring of God. The manifestation of life itself. As a matter of fact, all that God is, you are, and all that the Father hath is yours, because your relationship with the Father is oneness. And now remember, because of this, you have never been born. Because of this, you can never die. You can come into expression on this plane, and you can leave this plane. But be born never, die never, because you are inextinguishable life, indestructible life itself. You are the very I that I am. You are the very I am that I am. You are that very I am that I am. And this you must learn about yourself. I am that. I am He. I am. And I and the Father are one. The I that I am and the I that the Father is one. Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I and the Father are one. Destroy this temple, and there will still be an I to raise it up again. Destroy the property, there'll be an I to raise it up again. Destroy the business, there will be an I to raise it up again. Destroy anything and everything, anything you call a temple, including your body. But there'll always be an I to raise it up again, and that I is you. That I is you, heir of God, joint heir with Christ in God. Learn to know yourself. Learn to value yourself. Learn to understand that the only reason you are here is that God has sent Himself into individual expression as you. You didn't get here by accident. You didn't get here by virtue of your parents. You'd have gotten here if you hadn't had any parents, or if you had had to find other parents. It was your time to be here. It was God's time to send Himself into expression as your being. That was your destiny. You were born to it. And only because you've lived humanly have you perverted your destiny and missed the way. Because life is harmonious, and life is joyous, and life is fruitful once you know God is your life. Not this little thing we call Mary, Bill, Joel. That is just a tag that is put onto us. Do you know how they named children in Jesus' day? Worse than they do today, actually. They gave a person a name, and then always put alongside of it his father's name. Simon Bar Jonah. Yeshua Bar Joseph. And so everybody was identified with their human parent. They had no identity of their own. A little tag, but the great guy was the father. That's what they do with racehorses. We have no right to do that with ourselves, because we should acknowledge no father on earth. We should realize from the start that our parents are only the human instruments through which we are brought to expression, but that it is God that sent us into expression. Life itself expressing itself in an individual way. Once the Greek temple? O man, know thyself, and thou wilt know God. O man, know thyself, and thou wilt know God. Certainly, the moment you realize the nature of your being, you will see yourself as the coming out into visibility of the invisible life. You will realize that invisible, immortal, eternal life itself is sending itself forth as your being, and each one of us is vested with divine qualities. Should make some ministers and some doctors and some lawyers and some chiefs, because each must have some infinite individual capacity. That's why once you come to this spiritual way of life, competition dies. There is no such thing anymore as competition. It would make no difference what business, art, or profession you're in. You would never again know competition. Why? Because you would have individual qualities which set you completely apart from anyone else in any similar line. You would have infinite individual qualities, and these would set you completely apart, so that it really would make no difference what was happening to anybody else in the business world, as long as God was having an outlet through you. None of these things of earth would come nigh thy dwelling place. But you must know who I am. And then you must be able to look at your body and realize this is the temple of the I that I am. This is the instrument or vehicle given to me for expression. This is a tool. This is a way of life, of transportation, a mode of transportation. But I am greater than it. And I determine when it goes and when it comes and what it does. And that I is not my personal desire. That I is when I relax my personal desire and realize that since I and the Father are one, let the Father tell me. And when he says go, we go. And when he says stay, we stay. But unless you are able to look at your body, at your home, at your business, at your art, and realize, think, these are God's gifts to me. This is God's grace. And God is responsible, and I become an onlooker. I become a beholder of my life, witnessing what things God is doing through me and as me. And I marvel at it and wonder at it. What great things, what enormous things. You see, in this particular age where for the last 40 years or so, all emphasis has been on killing individuality and herding people into masses and destroying their individuality, making them all conform to patterns, even depriving them of the opportunity of earning their own way in life, of demonstrating their own ability to run a business. Everything herded. Make a great big corporation and put everybody on the payroll, and then when they're 60, kick them out. Or put them on a government payroll, and when they're 60, kick them out. Give them what is called Social Security, just enough to starve gracefully on. And make them believe that you're doing them a favor, too. You see, that has been the tendency this last 40 years, to take away from us our individuality. The small businessman has a hard time making a go of it because he's competing with $1 billion corporation. and he finds it difficult. And the same way all through, school teachers have to conform to a pattern or they get thrown out. Show a little individuality and there's no room for them anymore. And so it is all up and down the line of human relationships. The tendency is to put us in a uniform. The tendency is to make us all look alike and dress alike. The tendency is to make us all parts of one business machine. Well, it isn't going to work. This is just one of those phases that the world is going through that someday will have to crack up. And when it cracks up, people won't like it. But it'll be for their good. It'll be one of those evils that'll be for their good. Because the day must come again when we are individuals, when we have the right to profit by our own intelligence, our own efforts, as long as we're not using them in evil ways or destructive ways. So you will see that in this work, you will never be a conformer. You will never fit into the image of a herd. The first reason is, of course, that you're dealing with a truth itself that is individual and unique, and you'll have to be somebody set apart to be able to accept it and to withstand the pressure to yield and to conform. Secondly, as you do take your stand and succeed, you will have to watch some of your friends and relatives drift away from you, because they won't all stay. That is one of the momentarily bad things that happens to every one of us who goes on the spiritual path. We can't hold all of our friends and relatives. They get weary of us. We get peculiar because we have to have 3 or 4 or 5 evenings like this and have to break up their bridge game or their television game or their something, and we have become peculiar. Or we don't smoke anymore, or we don't drink anymore, and we are peculiar, or we don't take medicines anymore. All of these things make us so peculiar they can't stand us. And as a taxi driver said to me over in Australia one day, he said, "You know, we are not very popular here." No, why? He said, "Oh, you know how it is. Says, we don't smoke and we don't drink and we don't gamble, and first thing you know we own our own home, and then everybody tells us that we're destroying Australia because we're taking the money away." Well, that's the whole thing, you see. The minute we don't conform to the mob, to the herd, we become strange people. The minute we become strange people, many of our friends and many of our relatives can't take us. And at first, it hurts us to watch them go. Eventually, we realize there's no other way. We can't give up our individuality. We cannot give up what we've learned when we've witnessed it bring health and harmony and abundance into our experience. How can we go back? And we find we can't, and we have to go on, sometimes alone. The fortunate part of it is that we don't go on alone very long, because we find members of our own spiritual household. We find that even though we think we're alone in our town, all of a sudden there's 2 other people or 3 other people or 8 other people. Whereas we think we're alone on the path, it only takes a short time to prove that there are plenty around us. And even when they're not physically present, we have correspondence and we have telephones and we have all manner of means of communication that bring us together. Do you see now what I meant when I said that there are certain unique, specific principles of the infinite way, and you have to learn them? If they don't bring out a response in you, if your heart doesn't jump at them, then you will soon find you're going to drift away from us. And that's perfectly all right. Everyone must find their own place in life, and there never will be one teaching that will hold everybody. That can never come in the history of the world, because we're all different states and stages of consciousness. But those who feel an answering response with them, or who, when they read the books or hear the tapes, say, oh, this is mine, this is what I have believed, you will soon find that as you learn these specific principles, your whole life will begin to change. And let me show you.